A single announcement from Beijing just sent shockwaves through Tokyo's industrial heartland. Japan has 3 months to find a solution, or watch its economy bleed $4.5 billion. This isn't just about trade, this is economic warfare, and the clock is ticking. On January 6, 2025, China's Ministry of Commerce issued a directive that immediately triggered alarm bells across Japan's manufacturing sector. The message was clear and uncompromising. All dual-use items, materials and equipment with potential military applications would no longer be exported to Japan without strict government approval. For most countries, this might sound like bureaucratic procedure. But for Japan, it's an existential threat. Why? Because these so-called dual-use materials aren't luxury goods or niche products. They're the invisible backbone of Japan's entire industrial ecosystem. Rare earth elements, gallium, germanium, high-precision machine tools, specialty alloys. These materials flow through Japan's factories like blood through veins. Without them, entire sectors go dark. Industry analysts in Tokyo estimate that if Japan cannot secure alternative sources within the next 90 days, the damage will be catastrophic. Electric motor production could halt. Semiconductor equipment manufacturing could freeze. Precision machine tools, military electronics, radar systems, all at risk of systemic shutdown. The projected economic loss? 660 billion yen, roughly 4.5 billion US dollars. But here's the deeper question. Why now? Why did Beijing suddenly decide to tighten the screws on one of Asia's most powerful economies? And more importantly, can Japan survive this without Chinese rare earths? To answer that, we need to understand what makes Japan so vulnerable in the first place. Japan's economy is a marvel of engineering. It's not built on oil fields or vast farmlands. It's built on precision, on the ability to manufacture things better, smaller, and more efficiently than almost anyone else on the planet. Take a look under the hood of Japan's GDP, and you'll see a network of interdependent industries, automotive giants like Toyota and Honda, robotics leaders like Fanuc and Yaskawa, semiconductor equipment makers like Tokyo Electron, and precision tool manufacturers whose names you've never heard, but whose products are in everything from smartphones to fighter jets. All of these industries share one common dependency: rare earth elements. Rare earths aren't rare in the geological sense. They're scattered across the Earth's crust. But they're incredibly difficult to extract, refine, and process. And Japan, despite its technological prowess, has almost none of them. Japan is an archipelago of over 6,800 islands. Its confirmed rare earth reserves? About 50,000 tons. That's less than 1% of the global total. And most of those deposits are so small and low-grade that mining them commercially makes no economic sense. So Japan imports heavily. As of 2023, Japan imported roughly 7,784 tons of rare earths annually. Of that total, 5,700 tons, about 70%, came from China. That's down from over 90% in 2010, but it's still a dangerous level of dependency. And it's not just the quantity, it's the type. Japan's industries don't just need any rare earths, they need heavy rare earths. Elements like dysprosium, terbium, and neodymium are critical for making the high-performance magnets used in electric motors, wind turbines, and military hardware. China controls nearly all of the world's refining capacity for these elements. In other words, Japan's industrial superiority is built on a foundation it doesn't control, and Beijing knows it. This isn't the first time China has used rare earths as leverage. In 2010, a diplomatic crisis over a cluster of rocky islands in the East China Sea triggered what many now call Japan's rare earth nightmare. The islands are known as the Senkaku in Japan and the Diaoyu in China. Both nations claim sovereignty. Tensions had simmered for years, but in September 2010, a Chinese fishing trawler collided with Japanese Coast Guard vessels near the disputed territory. Japan detained the captain and announced plans to prosecute him under Japanese law. China saw this as an illegal arrest on sovereign Chinese territory, a direct challenge to Beijing's authority. The response was swift. China didn't issue a formal ban, but it didn't need to. Export quotas were slashed. Customs inspections slowed to a crawl. Approvals were delayed indefinitely. For about 7 weeks, rare earth shipments to Japan effectively stopped. The impact was immediate. Production lines across Japan's automotive and electronic sectors began shutting down. Battery manufacturers couldn't source the materials needed for rechargeable cells. Magnet producers ran out of neodymium. Exports of finished goods plummeted. Japan's government was cornered. After intense behind-the-scenes negotiations, Tokyo released the captain. Within 3 months, rare earth shipments resumed. But the damage was done, not physically, but psychologically. Japan realized it had been outmaneuvered. Its industrial might, its technological edge, none of it mattered if a single country could turn off the tap. In the years that followed, Tokyo launched an ambitious campaign to diversify its rare earth supply chains. The goal was clear: never again. Japan's failed diversification strategy, between 2010 and 2020, Japan poured billions of yen into reducing its reliance on Chinese rare earths. The strategy had 3 pillars: find new suppliers, develop alternative materials, and recycle existing stocks. On paper, it sounded promising. In practice, it was a struggle. Japan invested heavily in Australia's Lynas Corporation, one of the few non-Chinese rare earth producers with significant output. Japanese companies provided low-interest loans, technical support, and long-term purchase agreements. Lynas delivered, but only partially. The company could supply light rare earths like lanthanum and cerium, which are useful but not critical. Heavy rare earths, the ones Japan desperately needed, remained out of reach. Japan also tried to innovate its way out of the problem. Engineers redesigned electric motors to use less dysprosium. Material scientists developed ferrite magnets and composite alternatives. Software algorithms were tweaked to compensate for performance losses. But every workaround came with trade-offs. Motors became heavier, efficiency dropped, costs rose. And in high-stakes industries like aerospace and defense, good enough isn't an option. Then there was recycling. Japan became a world leader in extracting rare earths from old electronics, hard drives, smartphones, catalytic converters. It worked. But the economics were brutal. Recycled rare earths cost several times more than freshly imported ones. It was a stopgap, not a solution. Japan also joined a rare earth alliance led by India, hoping to tap into new sources. But by 2023, the results were underwhelming. India's rare earth production was still in its infancy, and geopolitical complications slowed progress. After more than a decade of effort and investment, Japan's dependence on Chinese rare earths had dropped from over 90% to 70%. Progress? Yes. Enough? Not even close. Because China's dominance isn't just about having the minerals, it's about controlling the entire value chain. China's unbreakable advantage. Let's be clear, China doesn't have the world's largest rare earth reserves. That title belongs to countries like Vietnam, Brazil, and Russia. But reserves mean nothing if you can't extract, refine, and process them at scale. China controls roughly 70% of global rare earth mining and over 90% of global rare earth refining. It has the technology, the infrastructure, and the environmental tolerance to do what other countries simply can't or won't. Rare earth processing is dirty, toxic, and expensive. Separating rare earth elements from ore generates mountains of radioactive waste and requires vast amounts of energy and chemicals. Western countries have environmental regulations that make large-scale refining economically unviable. China, for better or worse, has been willing to bear those costs. The result is a near monopoly. Even if Japan or the United States were to discover massive rare earth deposits tomorrow, they'd still need Chinese expertise to turn that ore into usable industrial materials. Building that capacity from scratch would take decades and cost tens of billions of dollars. This is why Japan's diversification efforts have stalled. This is why the 2025 export controls are so devastating. China doesn't just sell rare earths, it controls the entire ecosystem. And now, it's using that power as a weapon. Why did China pull the trigger? So, what pushed Beijing to act now? The trigger was political, and it was personal. In late 2024, Japan's Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba made a series of public statements that crossed a red line for China. He declared that if China were to take military action against Taiwan and it posed a threat to Japan, Tokyo would consider it an existential crisis and would respond accordingly. For Beijing, this was unacceptable. Taiwan is a core issue of Chinese sovereignty, a matter on which the Communist Party will not compromise. Any foreign leader suggesting military intervention is effectively challenging China's territorial integrity. China issued a formal diplomatic warning. Ishiba didn't back down. Instead, he repeated the remarks at multiple international forums, doubling down on Japan's alignment with the United States on the Taiwan question. Beijing's response was methodical. First, it banned all imports of Japanese seafood, citing environmental concerns over treated wastewater from the Fukushima nuclear plant. Then came the rare earth export controls. And just 24 hours later, China announced an anti-dumping investigation into dichloromethane, a key chemical exported by Japanese firms. The message was unmistakable. If you challenge us on Taiwan, we'll challenge you where it hurts most: your economy. The Japanese stock market reacted instantly. On the day of the announcement, chemical sector stocks collapsed. Shin-Etsu Chemical, Mitsui Chemicals, and other major players hit daily trading limits on the downside. Automotive giants Toyota and Honda saw their share prices drop by over 5% in a single session. Investors understood what policymakers were still processing. Japan's industrial machine runs on Chinese inputs. Without them, production stops. Corporate Japan was caught flat-footed. Many companies had rare earth inventories sufficient for only 2 to 3 months of operation. They had assumed, naively as it turned out, that no matter how tense diplomatic relations became, trade would remain insulated from politics. One procurement director at a major electronics manufacturer told the media that 70% of his company's supply orders came from China. All of them were now frozen. Production schedules, already optimized to the day, were thrown into chaos. The panic wasn't limited to rare earths. The export controls also covered high-precision machine tools, specialty metals, and advanced materials used in semiconductors and defense systems. These are the building blocks of Japan's competitive advantage. Losing access to them, even temporarily, could set Japanese industry back years. Faced with an impossible situation, Japan turned to a long-shot solution: deep-sea mining. In the second week after China's announcement, Japan's Marine Research Agency dispatched the exploration vessel Chikyu to the waters surrounding Minami Torishima, a remote coral atoll in the western Pacific. The mission drilled into the seabed at a depth of 6,000 meters and extract rare earth-rich mud. Minami Torishima is Japan's easternmost point, a speck of land in the middle of the ocean. But it grants Japan an exclusive economic zone of roughly 400,000 square kilometers, an area about the size of Japan itself. And within that zone, Japanese researchers believe, lies a treasure trove. Surveys conducted as far back as 2010 showed that the deep-sea mud around Minami Torishima contains rare earth concentrations several times, sometimes dozens of times, higher than land-based deposits. Even better, the mud is rich in heavy rare earths, the exact elements Japan needs most. If the estimates are correct, the reserves could supply Japan for hundreds of years. But there's a catch. Actually, several. First, the engineering challenge is staggering. Mining at 6,000 meters below sea level requires technology that barely exists. The pressure is immense, the environment is pitch black, and every piece of equipment must function flawlessly in conditions that crush conventional machinery. Second, the economics are brutal. Even if Japan succeeds in extracting the mud, the cost per ton could be 10 times higher than conventional rare earths. That makes it viable only as a strategic reserve, not a commercial solution. Third, there's the environmental toll. Deep-sea mining disrupts fragile ecosystems that scientists are only beginning to understand. If Japan moves toward large-scale operations, it will face international backlash from environmental groups and rival nations. And fourth, perhaps most critically, mining is only the first step. The extracted mud still needs to be refined, separated, and processed into usable rare earth oxides. That requires a sophisticated industrial infrastructure that, as of now, barely exists outside of China. In other words, even if Japan pulls rare earths from the ocean floor, it still needs China's factories to turn them into magnets, catalysts, and electronics. Deep-sea mining is a hedge, not a solution. It's a signal to Beijing that Japan won't surrender completely, but it's not a way out. So where does this leave Japan? In the short term, Japanese companies will scramble. They'll ration their remaining inventories, delay production schedules, and search desperately for alternative suppliers. Some will turn to the United States, Australia, and India, hoping to secure even small shipments of rare earths. Others will lobby the government for subsidies to offset the skyrocketing costs of recycled materials. Diplomatically, Japan will likely seek mediation. Behind closed doors, officials in Tokyo and Beijing may negotiate terms for a gradual resumption of trade, but that will require concessions. And on the Taiwan issue, Beijing is unlikely to budge. In the medium term, Japan may accelerate its diversification efforts. Expect more investment in Linus, more partnerships with Vietnam and Kazakhstan, and more government support for rare earth recycling and substitution technologies. But the long-term reality is stark. Japan cannot escape its dependence on China. Not in 5 years, not in 10. The rare earth supply chain is too complex, too capital-intensive, and too environmentally costly to replicate elsewhere. China knows this, and that's why these export controls aren't just a punishment. They're a reminder, a demonstration of power, a message to Japan and to the world that in the age of critical minerals, economic strength is inseparable from resource control. This crisis is about more than rare earths. It's about the new rules of global competition. For decades, the world economy operated on the assumption that trade and politics could be separated. Countries might disagree on human rights, territorial disputes, or military alliances, but business would continue as usual. That assumption is dead. We're now in an era where supply chains are weapons, where access to semiconductors, batteries, and rare earths can determine the outcome of geopolitical conflicts. Where the country that controls the raw materials controls the future. China understands this better than anyone. It has spent decades building dominance not just in rare earths, but in solar panels, batteries, electric vehicles, and advanced manufacturing. It has turned economic interdependence into strategic leverage. Japan, for all its technological brilliance, is learning a hard lesson. Innovation alone is not enough. If you don't control the inputs, you don't control your destiny, and the rest of the world is watching. 3 months. That's all the time Japan has to find a way forward. 3 months to secure alternative supplies, renegotiate with Beijing, or accept the consequences of a new economic reality. The clock is ticking, and in the high-stakes game of rare earths, China holds all the cards. The question is, will Japan fold or will it find a way to play a different game entirely? Only time will tell. But one thing is certain, this is just the beginning.